Hey there, welcome to XR Industry Leaders with ArborXR. My name is Brad Scoggin, and I am the CEO and one of three co-founders of ArborXR. And we've had the opportunity of working with thousands of companies since 2016. And we've learned a ton about what it takes for XR to be successful in your organization.
And I'm Will Stackable, co-founder and CMO. This podcast is all about interviewing the leaders who are on the ground making XR happen today. True pioneers in the space, from Amazon, Walmart, and UPS to Coke, Pfizer, and beyond, to uncover the pitfalls, lessons learned, and secrets that you can use to help grow XR in your organization.
Today, we get the privilege of sitting down with Mark Grob. Mark has been in XR for almost 20 years, a little over 20 years, which, probably feels like 60 years. He is currently the head of Immersive Tech for UPS. I think he's been doing that for a little over 5 years. And Mark, my first question for you that I did not ask you in the pre-interview is, are you wearing brown shorts right now?
No, I'm not wearing brown shorts. I have slacks on. I'm not doing the proverbial, home worker thing. So, no.
I love it. Well, before we get into, there's a lot we have to talk about, even back to some of your early days in VR and then what UPS is doing today. I would love to hear, I noticed in a number of places when you list your bio, you always mentioned that you're a dad. And so that seems important. And we'd love to hear about the personal side of the people we visit with. So yeah, tell us what it's like being a dad in 2022, teenagers.
Hey, kind of pre-discussion there, the whole aspect of device-dependent teenagers. I'm a parent of two. I kind of make the joke, when I hear metaverse, I think Roblox, because that's what, they live in. But generally, two lovely ladies, lots of emotion. And it's, as a dad, it's making the time for their sports and everything else. So I'm a lucky guy.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just had to navigate. My oldest daughter has a tablet, so no actual cell phone connectivity, but just texting etiquette was a thing that, I hadn't thought about. So that is fun. Okay, well, before we go to some of the UPS stuff, you have been in VR XR a long time. You started a company in the late 90s. So tell us about that. Tell us what made up both the interest in tech and the entrepreneurial side of Mark.
Sure. Way back when the internet was first talking about community internet, and they called this tech, internet, and there was technology like MR+ML, and they wanted to create communities. I got the bug. So I was an intern developing on Linux flight simulators using VR technology in a company that doesn't exist anymore called Silicon Graphics. Really got the bug. It was awesome. Back then, all the headsets weren't put together. You had to modularize and put everything together. And right out of college, I was an accounting major. My friends and I did a startup, Digital Cybernetics Corporation. It was based around 360-degree operating system. Now, no, it was an enhancement. And, we had it working on Mac OS 9 and Windows NT 4.1, something like that. And, it was an enhancement. It was really cool. You used the motion tracker, almost like kind of a panoramic 360 degrees around you workspace. It was cool, great technology in my mind at the time. But a very famous person said to me when I showed him it was, people don't pay for enhancements. And he was right, because 2 years after that, didn't go too well. And also we saw a major decline in VR. So yeah.
I have to ask, did you read a lot of sci-fi growing up? That sounds like a straight out of sci-fi company name.
Digital Cybernetics Corporation, I would say maybe my brother had some influence. He's actually now a medical doctor, but back then he was a pre-med student. So maybe there was something there, exploring with copper wiring on lab rats or something. I don't know. But back then, I think when you thought about technology combined with, living things, people would think cybernetic. So, technology terms change, I guess.
For those of us that weren't around at the start of that age, what was the feel? Was the sense that this is going to be here tomorrow? Like we're seeing into the future, and was there a sense of how long it was going to take? And did you have any realization of, this is going to take 20 or 30 years?
It's a tough question. Back then, the line I was giving my investors was 5 to 7 years. Um, that was the line. But in that interim, right, we had a lot of things happen, recessions and things of that nature. They all impact the technology. I would say the feeling then was very similar to the feeling a lot of people have now about the metaverse. So for someone like me now, I get cold sweats and I get nervous because, you can reflect on things you learned. But, you know, it's interesting and challenging times, is the saying, right?
I want to ask. You said that somebody said that people don't pay for enhancements, which I think is really interesting. So, just even jumping ahead for a bit to today, I mean, how do you see? Does today feel different from that perspective with XR? Does it feel like is it finding more of a core place in our lives, even in enterprise, or do you think is it still an enhancement to some degree?
Well, no, I definitely think the market's changed enough. To give you an idea, in the late 90s, early 2000s, you had to pay $50,000 just for a modded version of Unreal to run the devices, right? Nowadays, all that tech is freely accessible. We have amazing tools like Unity and Unreal. I mean, I wish I had it when I was going to college, right? Now students are able to learn all that technology. So the marketplace is definitely different. The fact that everything's integrated, I would say sort of the commoditization of the technology has happened. When we have these amazing things now like smartphones, back then those didn't exist. So there's a lot of innovation has happened for the technology since then. So, I have high hopes. But you always in the back of your mind says, well, what's going to sort of trigger disinterest, right? You always want to think about that. But yeah.
I wasn't planning on asking this, but we got to get a hot take. What in your mind, what is the metaverse if you're going to define it, which is, it's a hard one, but, and then, yeah, do you have a feel on, we were seeing everybody, chief metaverse officer, every company has a metaverse strategy. What's your feel? You've been in that world longer than most.
One thing I'll say, working at UPS, one thing I've learned is to think things out thoroughly. So to answering your question, I would say it's a whatever verse. My opinion, I'm focused more towards enterprise. It's really, the decentralization of technology, the enterprise or industrialization, of technology into, like UPS, we call it our smart hub or smart network. I really kind of see the metaverse being more of that, more Web3, less social networks. Because, there's the appeal of, and from a business sense, right, still trying to figure, we're going to have to formulate what that means in regards to multiple users socializing on a platform, right? We're not in a marketing business, right? We're in a service business. So maybe there's value of, quote, the whatever verse, the UPS verse, whatever you want to call it verse, for better customer service, better employee experience as well. The aspect of using the same technology, digital twins, as a process to onboard employees, things of that nature. But what does the metaverse mean to UPS or to me? It's an opportunity to sort of improve customer experience as well as employee experience. But how that actually is going to shape out or how that's actually going to work, that'll be an interesting question. From the deployment IT side, there's a ton of challenges. When you think about on the enterprise side, right, unlike a social network business, all the infrastructure is owned and maintained by you. So it'll be interesting. I have made jokes in previous association meetings about corporate doesn't care. Big enterprise is not going to care about it till there's the intranet version of it, right? Otherwise, it's just going to be a marketing portal store, in the public eye. We'll see.
Okay, so let's shift to UPS. So UPS, I mean, it's been around for decades. You've been there for 5 years as the head of, I mean, doing VR stuff to some degree, or XR stuff. So I think one question that's always really interesting to us, really interesting to a lot of our listeners and people in the space is, what was the process for a company like UPS to shift from business as usual to, okay, there's this new XR thing. Maybe there's a way to use that in our company. What was that process like, and what role did you play in that?
Yeah, so I came on board in late 2017 in November. So as of this month, it's been 5 years. And when I came on board, really the challenge or the question I was given by the portfolio manager of UPS, his name was Joe Lawless, was really how to build the practice. That's that journey that you're kind of talking about. It's the how do you utilize the technology in the space, right? We all know about how XR has a bad rap when it comes to, people get I call it the magic effect glow when it comes to the technology, right? They want to do something with it. But in enterprise, it's really about, well, how does it align to business? The aspects of, and specifically for enterprise, right? The biggest lesson I've learned over the last, I would say the first 3 years, was the challenge of deployment, right? So for enterprise, being able to deploy the technology in a cost-effective way is very important, right? That was the initial challenge, right? Everybody had beacon stations and everything else up, right? That cost a lot of money to install every time you wanted to do it, right? 2019, right? We were deploying PC tethered stuff. It was $10,000, $9,000 per unit install to do, right? And then, put the brakes on, and now we have all-in-one headsets, which, cost $1,500 to deploy, right? So all of a sudden, the scale of deployment is a lot higher now from the standpoint of cost and just the resources needed to deploy. So that was a big learning process. That's excluding things like developing, VR publishing platforms for, what I would describe as subject matter experts within your organization so that you can utilize the tools. But specific to sort of the deployment aspect to it, it's been a big challenge. But now, we look at UPS, we have a defined sort of mature VR practice around training. So, the latest change in the last 2 years have really helped accelerated where we're going with that. And, with technology like ArborXR, sort of what I could describe as a self-support MDM sort of solution, it's good stuff. Very positive motions in that direction. Now it's really a case of, in the practice, defining processes for your business people so that they can properly utilize the technology, right? Because part of that's education. Everybody gets the big glowy eyes. They want to play with the toy, but that only lasts so long. You really have to build a tool that creates value and profit for the company.
Definitely. Oh, and when you talk about deployment challenges, can you expand on that a little bit, maybe for our audience? Like what were the biggest, or what are the biggest friction points you've faced around deployment specifically?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, if you're going to deploy any technology into the field, it has to be managed and maintained, right? Then you ask yourself two questions. Is it going to be something that's internally maintained and supported, or is it going to go out into the wilds and I don't have to support it, right? But if it goes out into the wilds, I still need analytics. I still need some sort of return on that investment. So, thinking that way, right? Internally sort of deploying the technology, right? You have to do things as silly as maintaining certificates for Wi-Fi, right? You have to maintain proper security protocols for devices. Honestly, that's been a huge challenge for the last 4 years of my career at UPS, because specifically the XR industry, if you want to call that, or the market, it's constantly playing catch up to the rest of the business smartphone world, right? So the aspect of, XR devices running on Android 10 or 11. Meanwhile, we have smartphones that are running so many things higher, or they have, specific enterprise standards that we apply to smartphones, but we can't apply to XR devices. It's a big deal. You get Wi-Fi engineers saying, no, you can't deploy this to this area because it doesn't meet these requirements, right? Huge challenge. The last few years it's definitely improved. Hopefully that kind of gives some light into it.
Hey, you mentioned the Android versions, and most people on this call probably know that, these headsets are running Android open source, and there's some unique challenges there. What have you found just when it comes to doing deployments and looking at general compatibility with existing device management solutions? What are some of the sticking points?
Well, I mean, the big one I think that kind of sticks out when it comes to you guys is cost to experiment, let's say. A lot of, I would assume, businesses right now are hesitant to explore MDM because their traditional MDMs are very expensive. And when you think about that, right, you guys make it so that it's very easy to sort of explore, this sort of, stick your feet in the water, test it out. It's not very expensive. It's very easy to use. As long as you have the connectivity. That would be kind of the key points. Other aspects is some business may have MDMs that don't have or have even thought of supporting XR devices. So, those are all challenges when you have business aligned roadmaps and then you're trying to look at this technology.
I want to go back to 2017. So you come on in 2017 and you're charged with building the practice. So at that point in UPS, was leadership already sold on VR as something that needed to be implemented, or were you still experimenting? Like what was the kind of the temperature at that point?
2017, I came on board. We had some amazing upper level management where they definitely could envision the potential. But it was the case of, well, how are you going to properly do it? The practice, right? The idea of standards, guidelines. So senior management, and I think generally UPS as a whole, they already had, I'd say, they had a lot of familiarity with augmented reality because UPS, with automation and everything else, computers, robots, and everything else, computer vision, aspects of markers and that aspect, they had a strong understanding, right? This is a company that built the iPad, their version of the iPad before the iPad was out there. They have their dyad, right? So they were pretty familiar with augmenting reality type technology. VR, less so, but they already had groups. UPS has a institution called Integrad. That's like your driver's safety, right? When I came on board, they had preliminary sort of POCs, but nothing that was localizable, nothing that was deployable globally. And the way they were deploying it was very desktop. Again, it was high, it was expensive. So all these things, when you start playing into rubrics, KPIs, return on investment sort of questions, it plays against the technology at the time. And it was really a case of sort of engineering and finding solutions that best matched to what the organizational need was. And in that frame, graduating from concepts or proof of concepts or MVPs around VR training to all of a sudden, I describe it as going from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds because the proof of concept had value, and all of a sudden now from an IT organizational standpoint, you have to support that. There's those challenges as well. So, you go from one sort of concept all of a sudden to different business groups saying, oh, we want health and safety for hazmat. We want, proper way to pick up a box to, we want more experiences around driver safety and our special methodologies, right? And then all of a sudden, this is, within initial launch of a POC to 3 months down the road, all of a sudden people see it. You can watch the YouTube video to all of a sudden, all the business groups wanting to rush into the technology. And I call that, it's the magic phase, right? Everyone sees this cool toy, it's magic, right? And in a way, from an organizational standpoint, that's a huge challenge as well. And it was frustrating because the organization looks to you as sort of, you're the guidance, you're the SME, on this. So, what should we do? So it was definitely challenging.
Well, and tell me, this is something, and this, forgive our ignorance here. We think about this a lot, and we talk to a lot of companies that are at different stages of deployment. But one thing I'm always really curious about is, you talk about different departments saying, oh, we want to use VR for this or that. Like, what is that? Like, what are the steps in that process? Like, is it a department has an idea, and then, how is that validated? How does it even get to the point of saying, we're going to actually go build content for it? We're going to use this piece of hardware, and then this is how we're going to measure if it actually is beneficial. What could you share with kind of some of those steps?
So I think I can share that, over the last 4 years, my groups built the practice around that. So the idea of, the best solutions, I always say, are somebody that's in the field, boots on the ground, right? So, it took some time, but now we have the tech in place, the business process, the culture, where somebody that has an idea can say, okay, hey, I want to do this. I want to create a simulation to prevent people picking up, some hazardous material in a broken package, right? We have, I would almost say, a business process where we teach them about, I would almost describe it like game development 101, or sort of how to express your technical requirements to a technical vendor so they could develop it, right? Those are things we actually had to put in place. Every organization, believe it or not, has very creative people in there that if it was up to them, they would do it themselves, right? So creating the processes to help them sort of vent or express what it is they want to do. It's very important. So that's generally it. It's, someone has an idea. Generally, they would either go to like some of our events. We do roadshow type of stuff internally inside the company, or, they have an idea, it bubbles up to top level management and Alp, or used to be Juan, or, Joe, or somebody else, even Carol. They'll say, oh, you want to do something in VR or AR. Okay, there's this group. Send an email to these guys. Or we have a Teams channel, right, where people can, through exploring SharePoint sites, right, they can find us and they can kick off a process. But that took time to figure that out, right? Kind of reiterate, right? One cool thing about UPS is typically we do things and they're well thought out. They're not impulsive. So, and where you asked, it's all part of that process.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that there's the freedom for people to be creative, and then there's channels and there's outlets for that. I think that's really, really cool. What can you tell us about just some of the different use cases of VR today at UPS?
So around VR,
I'd love to hear too if there's any particular success story you've got. If you wanted to zoom in on, I'd love to hear a few of the different ones, but if you've got one in particular, maybe that's already well underway, that you could just sort of zoom in on a little bit.
So, a big success story for us would be, obviously it's our driver safety. I originally talked about one experience. Right now, that group has 12 experiences in a catalog, right? And that's all, managed and uploaded to the devices through the MDM, right? The fact that they went from looking at what I would describe as more of a traditional mentor system, where, say, someone observes them driving, to saying, you know what, that's just, there's time lost there. And simply saying to them, hey, if you want to learn or experience this program, this particular curriculum, here's a VR headset, and they don't have to go travel somewhere, sit in a car with somebody and see what they're doing. Instead, they can sort of virtually experience that all themselves. And the cool thing with the tech was we found it's accelerated. So they didn't have to do 8 hours. They could do 2 hours and they'd have the same level of retention and understanding of an 8-hour day, right? So that's a big deal when you start thinking about time spent.
That's very cool. So we were at AES recently, and I got to listen to a lot of talks. And one thing that came up a number of times that I thought was really interesting in talking about the ROI, there were several companies who said, once you as a company can really land on your sweet spot for XR and really find where the value is being added, almost the cost of implementation doesn't matter because the ROI is just so great. Agree with that? Disagree with that? I mean, where's UPS on that spectrum of finding the sweet spot?
Well, I would say UPS could probably definitely agree. There's some areas where I would describe as are trained knowledge workers, so aircraft maintenance, because UPS is a big airline, right? Cost of the equipment versus the cost if something's done wrong, it's a huge difference, right? So the fractions of the cost of that equipment to the prevention that it does, it's excellent, right? It's a great return on investment. Health and safety, right? The idea of mitigating, injury. It's, any scenario like that, the equipment pays for itself because it's preventative, So those are easy ROIs.
Well, I just love that we're at a place, the whole theme kind of AES was no longer asking the question, does XR work, but how to scale XR. And then there were a lot of conversations like this where lots of different use cases where, exactly like you said, whether it's health and safety or whatever, the costs just don't compare to the benefits. And I think even when you talk about shaving training down from 8 hours to 2 hours with an increased retention, I almost think we're seeing it play out, but I don't know that we collectively are really grasping how much that's going to impact our ability just to learn, beyond enterprise, even in education, which I think is really, really exciting. And especially if I would assume someone who's been in XR since 1998, to see us getting to this point with really clear ROI and really asking questions that haven't been asked for a long time, that things have matured enough to get to that point. So maybe tell us, either from UPS or just you personally, with where the market's at today, what are you excited about and what's ahead?
I'm really excited that, it's not a question of can it be done anymore. It really is exciting that we're past that. In enterprise, it's exciting that now it's a case of why aren't you doing it? Those are kind of, for me, those are the encouraging, the exciting stuff. There's some other things I'd like to say, but I can't talk about. But the progression of the technology, the aspects of, yes, the M word, the concept of decentralization. I would say, not for nothing, one good thing about COVID was it very quickly allowed business to realize that, decentralized workforces, giving your employees tools to be highly productive, they're all very important. And, look at UPS. It progresses and gives your company success. And I think XR as a whole, it's really exciting. VR, I think we're at a point where we are almost at a point where it's a stable, there's a high confidence tool that you can use in the space. Because that's something that's been a bane to VR, is just the reliance and consistency of a technology. It's stable now. It's not, is it going to work? We know it's going to work and we can rely on it. So that's exciting too. AR is exciting. because we see a lot of initially, in the last year or so, a lot of sort of pivots, and people are starting to get the idea that, hey, VR has its value. In the end, what's the final product going to be? I think everybody would say, VR and AR, in the end, they're going to be together, because it's really going to be just a case of what it is that you're doing at what time. That's how the device's features are set. It'll be interesting. The sort of trends in regards to just the technology and knowledge sharing, within the community. The community has grown so much just since 2014. I'm amazed that now universities are offering certificates and majors for the technology, which to me is always a good thing. So there's a lot of good things going on. My hopes is that the excitement continues, and as a community, as a group, things develop.
Yeah, I love that. As we close here, what advice would you give to new adopters if you were starting today with a deployment, a new fleet of headsets? What would you do differently?
Slow down. Get away from the smoke and mirrors as quick as possible, no matter what the technology is. And I think any solutions architect will tell you that. Really, you have to reflect the technology based on your business. Get away from the, we want to do something cool with this trinket, and really reflect on, well, how can this trinket make our business better? That's, you're going to save yourself 2 years if you get that done right away. The other thing is, there's still risk aversion, because there's businesses out there that think that the latest tech coming out, the VR headsets coming out, are just like cardboards. They're not. I've had previous business stakeholders within UPS say to me, no, they don't want to do something. And then I present them with the newer technology, and they're like, hey, wait a second, you guys fixed this, So technology wise, the tech is a lot better. There's a lot of us out there that have been making lots of mistakes, and we've been learning from those mistakes. So, my advice would just be, there are groups out there like you guys where, they've made the mistakes for the business person that, I'm talking to. So the risks of applying the technology are a lot less. There's a lot of opportunity on the business side for this technology. And, my kind of feeling right now is, we're past the, can we do it? And it really is a question now about, you got to look at the tech and say, how can it make our business better?
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's super helpful. Okay, last question here. Kind of a fun one. So 10 years from now, looking back, what surprises us?
Oh, I hate these questions. Because when I was doing startups, I was notorious for doing bleeding edge. So, what I'm, 10 years from now, barring R words and financials and wars and things like that, my hopes is in 10 years from now, successful business frameworks or technology frameworks related to wearables, XR wearables, will be a thing and hopefully relevant. Do I think it's going to replace the smartphone? I don't know. I think VR and specifically XR wearables are going to become slaves to fashion in 10 years. Mm-hmm. So you're always going to have the variety. But from the standpoint of technology management, things of that nature, I think like we have now with smartphones, XR devices are going to be in the same book, the same thing. Everyone will support it. The metaverse question is iffy. I just say because even in 10 years, there's a lot of factors that are dependent on the technology to be successful. So, maybe there'll be a 3D web out there, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe more open multi-user services out there for gaming, right? Or as we're seeing, cloud collaborative solutions for, interfacing with XR wearables. I think in 10 years, we'll have something, right? Definitely feel the acceleration of the technology is a lot quicker than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the late 90s, it was 7 years. Now some trends are 2 years, some trends are 5 years. So how will it be in 10 years? It's a tough one. One thing I would say is probably, I think all businesses, speaking from a standpoint of enterprise, there'll be some level of adoption of the technology, but how they use it obviously going to be specific to their business case.
Before we wrap, I've got to ask, MetaQuest Pro or Pico 4? You don't have to answer as UPS if you don't want to.
UPS has partnerships with HTC, so my answer is Vive Focus 3, or any future device that might be soon announced. But on a personal note, I mean, I like the technology. Social trolling, not as much. The Pico 4, I really like because of the auto IPM, things of that nature. From a standpoint of being a business nerd doing deployments, I probably would go for the Pico 4 over the MetaQuest Pro. I think the MetaQuest Pro is a little early, but I'm reserving the decision on that because I haven't officially evaluated it yet.
I had to ask current event, but well, speaking of HTC, because we work closely with them, we've even worked with them to develop a batch configuration option for large deployments. Could you talk a little bit about what is your experience working with them on enterprise deployments, and what do you like about the headset?
I mean, we UPS gave them the designs, I would say requirements of the Vive Focus 3 in 2018. We basically said, look, if there was a device for VR training that we'd want, what are the characteristics? What you're seeing in the Vive Focus 3 is what they were. The ability to deploy with their methods, I would say right now it's pretty standard in the sense of they're not smart devices and smartphones, so they don't have their own data service. So the method of how to deploy is pretty similar to everybody else. I would actually say what you guys offer is more a preference because it's more intuitive and it's a better experience than kind of the way they've currently have it going. But, we're very happy with the batch processes that they have now, since now things are more generic. The reliability, the ability to know, okay, the boot image that I've got on this system, it's going to work every time. It's there now. I mean, 2 years ago, it was sketchy, especially with the Vive Focus Plus. With the Vive Focus 3, after 3 or 4 firmware updates, like running 5.14 or above, it's been pretty consistent. So it's been a good experience. And going back to the whole scalpel reliance of a tool question, right? We can rely on it now compared to, previous things where, it was sketch. My hopes is obviously, they get more resources and more support. There's a lot of features we've talked about, firmware, over Wi-Fi sort of updating and things like that. I'd love to see. Other things, things like better tools for the virtual classroom. Things like instructors' ability to see multi-client screen grabs or streaming is huge, because for the last 3 years, our VR instructors in a lot of these institutions have been asking for that. And I would love to see like a really stable solution that's not like a borderline spyware by a provider. Those are the things that I'm hoping, in the sense of Viveverse and things like that. Vive's come a long way. Viveport's come a long way. So, it's definitely a better experience. But, my hopes is there's continued improvement.
Love that. It is nice to have stability and to be asking new forward-looking questions.
Key thing when it comes to enterprise, business isn't gonna sign up for jankiness. They want stability.
Maybe it works fine in a pilot project, but when you go to start scaling up, it becomes if you're on the line when something goes wrong.
Side loading is not fun. Not fun.
No, that is truth right there. Side loading is.
I need the T-shirt that says that. Side loading is not fun.
Well, Mark, it has been great chatting with you today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to come and answer some questions and share what UPS is up to. It's exciting to see UPS in a leadership position in this new technology, and exciting to see what you've been able to do.
It's my pleasure. I really appreciate the time, guys.
Anytime. And people can find you on LinkedIn, Mark Grob, Grob, and we appreciate it.
Not a problem. And you can also attend. I co-chair the VR/AR Association's Enterprise Forum, so they're always welcome. Feel free. As a community, I'm here to support anytime.
Well, I have to say, the thing I'm most surprised about from that episode is that Mark was not wearing brown shorts. I would have bet a lot of money that he was. But honestly, I think interviews like that are what the industry needs to hear. You got a company that I think most think of as a brown truck delivering packages. It's a 100-year-old plus company, but the reality is they are on the cutting edge of technology. They've been testing and proving out XR for years and seeing results like 8 hours of training down to 2, no truck, no trainer, increased retention rate, very, very impressive.
It really is. And going into a recession potentially, seeing companies that are actually ramping their spending on XR because it's been proven out. They've done it in pilot projects and it's saved them so much time and money that they're now ramping. I think it's exciting and it's a good sign for the industry. So thanks for listening, everybody. If you want to find us, check us out on arborxr.com/podcast. We've got show notes and a lot of great links there. And you can find us wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.